Right. Hey, everyone. Welcome. This is Caitlin Coleman. I'm Water Education Colorado's Publications and Digital Resources Managing Editor. And I'm really excited to present today's webinar on the Colorado Water Plan in action. We have a big agenda today, but before we get started, I'd like to welcome Sabrina White. She's our Programs Director, and she's going to say a few words about what we have going on at WECO.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. If you are new to the Water Education Colorado world, we have a series of programs and publications that just really help people stay grounded in the science and sustainability efforts of water administration in Colorado. Some of those programs are our annual river basin tour, where we choose a river basin in Colorado to drive around and learn about the unique hydrological challenges that face those areas. We also have a leadership program called Water Leaders that takes up-and-coming water professionals and gives them the skills to manage successfully. And then also we run a program called Water Fluency, which really grounds people, again, in that kind of base level, well, maybe base isn't the right word, but that kind of ground foundation of water science and the realities, again, of water administration in the state. We also have several publications, Headwaters News, which is a tri-annual publication on just topical water issues and how those interface with existing water law and other, more national water administration issues. I will take a brief moment. I'm sorry, everyone, I'm feeling a bit under the weather today. So if I seem like I'm talking slowly, that is not my intention. And then we also have our community guides, which are a series of 10 more textbook or reference book style publications to just really give you a primer on things like water law, where your water comes from, etc. You can check both of those out on our website, watereducation.org, watereducationcolorado.org. I'm sorry, and I will link that in chat. And also just sign up for our newsletter, become a member if you would like to do that, and just really stay up to date on our programs. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Caitlin.
Thank you, Sabrina. Some quick logistics before we jump into everything. Please remain muted during our presentations. I think most of you are muted right now. We'll allow 15 minutes or so for Q&A at the end of our time together today. And at that point, we'll invite you to turn on your cameras and unmute as you pose questions. If you have questions during the presentations or you want to communicate while other folks are talking, you can use the chat and type questions in there. Also, our webinar is being recorded, so if all goes well with the recording, we should be able to share that by early next week. So I think those are all the logistics. So to actually get us started, as many of you know, for Water Education Colorado, we try to organize a webinar to dive deeper into the content from each issue of Headwaters magazine. Our spring 2023 issue of Headwaters hit mailboxes in late April, and it focused on the update to the Colorado Water Plan. In that issue, you can maybe see the cover behind me. It's right here. And you should have seen it in our emails. We'll send you a link later as well. In that issue, we covered a variety of topics related to the water plan. We heard over and over again that a lot of the really exciting meat behind the plan is the work that regular people and partners are doing to put it into action. And that's all reflected in the new setup of the water plan that focuses on action areas and highlights partner action ideas. So today we're diving into that. We're going to hear from 5 great speakers, and we'll start off by hearing from Russ Sands with the Colorado Water Conservation Board, who will share something of an overview of the water plan, and orient us to those action areas and funding available to implement them. And then we'll switch gears and hear about some real life projects from people across the state that exemplify some of those actions and action areas. And then we'll dive into a panel discussion and hear your questions and comments. So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce Russ Sands. He's Water Supply Planning Section Chief at the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Russ?
Awesome, thanks so much. Just 3 years into using Zoom, and you'd think I'd come off mute quicker, but apparently not. Thanks everybody, thanks so much for the time. I think the biggest challenge for me will be staring at you while I look at my other screens, but I will try to not make you seasick with my head motions. Thanks for the nice introduction. Again, Russ Sands with the Colorado Water Conservation Board. I run the water supply planning section at CWCB, and our agency is a small group, but work on a ton of things. And one of those things, of course, is the water plan. And want to really, as was noted in the tee up, kind of give you just an overview of how really our thinking evolved in living with the first water plan that came out in 2015, and how that framed how we reshaped things a little bit in the recent update. But it very much, I think the lesson is that it takes all of us pulling together. And while the state has many great levers and tools that we can use and pull at times to help affect a change, really that change often comes at very local levels with folks like you and all the other great people around the state making everyday decisions that are so critical. And certainly the projects that are built are a big piece of that. So I'll just kind of dive into a little bit of the water plan here. I think I wanted to note that the water plan isn't one thing, it's a few things. So there's kind of these three big pieces of that plan: the analysis and technical update. And this really, it dates back to the first of these plans came out, was previously labeled as statewide water supply initiative, but it came out in 2004 was the call to have the first, or prior to that, 2004 was the first SWASI that came out. It really sets the stage for looking to the future. And now we are still looking out on a kind of 2050 horizon, largely because that's where our population data tells us we can look. Our climate data typically extends farther, but we incorporate both. So we look at a series of scenarios in the plan. That was a concept that was embedded in the first 2015 plan, and then we've subsequently run that to ground with actual modeling. So as we look at those 5 scenarios in the plan and have modeled them, we see that by 2050, we could have up to a 740,000 acre foot gap per year in water needs. And this is really looking at the municipal level. That number is actually even bigger for agriculture, but the municipal number tells us a lot about how cities might need water. And of course that kind of leads to where they get it. So this has a bigger impact. So this how we can reduce that gap is of key interest. And in those upper ends, we're seeing highest population growth and up to 4.2 degrees Fahrenheit of warming by 2050, which is massive number. If we think of potentially 4 degrees warmer than what we're living through right now and what we just lived through with drought. But that is really the underlying foundational technical data of the water plan. And we kind of look at these bookends of what that future need might be. The second piece is working with our basin roundtables. Again, kind of born out of 2002 drought period was this need to have kind of codified stakeholder input at the roundtable basin level. So these roundtables are kind of grassroots stakeholder groups that help inform ultimately the water plan. And one of the ways they do that is through these BIPs, which you're seeing on there. There's kind of these basin plans. 2 of the basins work together. You're seeing a map of those there, but the 8 basin implementation plans or BIPs tell us a lot about what local need and response might look like. They also tell us what local projects are being developed. So this is kind of a snapshot of the breakouts that we heard by basin of kind of the level of projects that they identified might be moving forward in their basin. So it's a huge piece because as the state, we don't really build those projects, we fund quite a few of them. But we roll up all of that input into the water plan. So best place you can go, and for the kind of shortest quick deep dive on the water plan, is through Engage CWCB. And just really the executive summary, we really tried to design as a one-stop shop for kind of understanding the intricacies of the plan without having to read too deeply, but it's about 24-page read. This is one of the pages that you're seeing that just really sets the stage for Colorado. Key issues, as many of you are well familiar with, but we have a lot of the population on the east slope, a lot of the water on the west slope, how we move water across the state, how we think about municipal needs, agricultural needs, environmental needs is of key interest, and how we balance all these things. At the same time, in the larger context, we're providing water to 19 other states and Mexico. And as a headwater state, we have a lot of responsibility for how we protect, conserve, and use that water in Colorado, but also how it exits our borders, in considering all the compacts, decrees, and agreements that we have with the other states around us. More there, so I'll leave it there for your reading pleasure. I'll take a little bit longer on this page. This is actually kind of the first big information you come to in the executive summary, and this was really meant to be water plan on a page. And I'll just give you the key pieces here, but warming's increasing. We talked about that, up to 4.2 degrees warming. Even the latest information that's coming out globally, there's some that are pointing slightly higher than that, but generally firm agreement in a lot of climate modeling that things are warming and that this is about the ballpark of how warm we could be looking at by 2050. Much less agreement around precipitation. In fact, that will vary. The temperature will vary too. As we look across the state, it could be warmer, drier, wetter in certain areas. But overall, that warming trend is pretty significant, and it drives a lot of our water needs. Water conservation is still a huge area for us to double down in. Now is not the time to shy away. Now is the time to reinvest and find new ways that we can invest in water conservation, both indoors and outdoors. And we're hearing a lot of that, good discussion around turf replacement and other things. What are the next frontiers? Where can we really push the limits? In the water plan, we talk a lot about land use planning and water conservation and alternative water supply, and really the nexus between those, which I often think of as one water or one water ethic. Storage is still a part of how we operate as a state. It's still going to be a need. What that looks like is probably in the eye of the beholder, and there will be many robust conversations around the state of what that looks like. But overall, just on paper, we could probably double the amount of storage in the state. I'm not sure anybody's advocating for that much, but certainly there is room to grow with storage. But maybe it's smaller storage or more distributed storage, or we're talking about ASR storage that we're putting underground. So there's different types of storage, but still a prominent piece. All of this is framed up in the context of water law and prior appropriation. And we need projects. We need all the projects we can get. They're not always going to be, concrete and rebar. They're going to be environmental efforts or stream restoration projects or educational efforts or, conservation programs across the state. And we need all these solutions and more as much as we can get, as quick as we can get. So really, I think the thrust of this conversation here today is, how do we work with partners like you to get more of these projects developed, get more of these good ideas moving forward so that we can envision our best future and mitigate some of those worst impacts. So the water plan is really meant to inspire, and this kind of gives you a highlight of the areas that we cover. When we were rewriting it, again, we thought a lot about, well, what is a water plan? Because on some base level, it is a strategy document for our organization, and yet it really does serve this higher means of really trying to bring the state together to think about critical water challenges, where our best opportunities are for collaboration and mitigating risk. And so with that in mind, we kind of struck this 50-50 approach. So there are 50 partner actions, as Caitlin noted at the beginning. These partner actions are really the things that you can do. We tried to give examples across a spectrum of all the concepts in the water plan of the kind of good work we know needs to move forward in Colorado. They're also the kind of things that we can back up through grant funding that we have through water plan grants, and I'll touch on that more in a minute. There are also 50 agency actions. Those are the things that we as an organization will do, or perhaps us in collaboration with, or sometimes some of our partner or collaborating agencies helping us lead, like Colorado Department of Ag or the Public Health Department. These are actions across all these 4 areas of the plan, and you could really clearly argue these are very integrated. More and more, I think even these last few drought years have taught us we are very connected. But just to help separate out categories of thinking about what we need in that kind of more municipal space, vibrant communities captures municipal water needs, what water utilities, towns, cities, our smallest cities, which may be in some cases very ag-centric or agricultural-centric towns, up to our big metro areas, all things municipal water use. Robust agriculture is talking about our farms, our acequia communities, our ranches, all things food and fiber in the state. Thriving watersheds is where we really talk about environmental recreational needs, aquatic species, river protection, stream management plans, increasingly forest health. And then resilient planning is kind of a carve out that we've made for the space that we talk about not just climate concerns, but what do we do about it? And recognizing that part of what we do is education and outreach to help educate people, not about just the issues, but where they can actively serve a role in helping. Some of that supported by smart government, I like to say, or what is our role to help facilitate that, often through funding or our own support of education and outreach efforts. So I talked about those partner actions. And I would just say that, again, these are the important actions of what we really need help advancing. Most of that, realizing it's going to come through water plan grants. There are several grant programs we run. There are several grant programs across the state. We are one agency of many groups like Colorado Water, Parks and Wildlife have many grant programs. CDPHE, Health Department have many. We often work in conjunction, and sometimes different projects may be a better fit. If it's a water quality effort, for example, that's probably going to live more with Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. If our focus is often more on the water quantity side of things, and the legislature gave us these 5 categories. So water plan grants strike on conservation and land use, watershed health and recreation, water storage and supply, agriculture, and then engagement and innovation. So certainly, I think it's important to note that often when we're funding groups, those are entities. A lot of our grant program is not necessarily designed to have an individual come in, although I suppose it's not impossible, but there's just some processes we'd have to go through for tax implications and how that would work. Often we're funding municipalities or NGOs or others who are bringing together kind of coalitions of people to get this work done. So kind of in thinking about that, I wanted to make sure that we kind of at least touched on other ways people can help. I like to think about this a lot as Russ Ann sitting in Denver. I'm not the water rights holder, but I still have influence. And I think I'm hoping that the water plan serves to inspire people to take that opportunity that's in front of them. And I think a lot of times when we think about, well, what is that opportunity? Well, we know we need local communities to come together and individuals to act and move change, because change is so often happening, even big water decisions, often at a very hyper local level. And I think the water plan sets the stage for making sure that that conversation, whether it's a new storage project or whether it's moving water somewhere, or whether it's even a stream management plan, that it really needs to bring as many stakeholders together to the table to make sure that that is moving forward in the way that can help stretch that water as far as it can go and uplift all of these areas and as many people as it can. To focus on, I guess to dive into that a little bit more, I think it's really critical. And if nothing else, the water plan serves as a tool for learning about all our water issues in the state. Each of those basins, and I know Daniel is going to present in a second, but if you want to know what's happening in the Rio Grande, you can go to their basin implementation plan and get an even deeper dive. But Chapter 4 of the water plan talks about each basin, so you can kind of see what's happening in your community and where those challenges are. But we really need people to kind of move to those next steps of taking action. And that may be sometimes just at your home. We think about water conservation, but increasingly getting involved with the local group, talking with your city council, working with your local water utility, or ultimately even if that's of interest, you have a group that you're working with coming in for a water plan grant. So now is the time, and what we've been living through with drought and our future forecast for climate change, and increasingly, I'm sure, more dry years. We need all the solutions we can bring. We need as many people under the tent as we can. Really trying to set the stage for an inclusive and robust dialogue that can bring these solutions and build these projects. So I will leave it there. Maybe just to leave on a little bit of a hopeful note. If you're reading the news, you're probably hearing a lot out there that can kind of get you down. I mean, it's tough, and we're not shying away from that in the water plan. If things are even a little warmer, it'll be tougher, and it's been tough now. And depending on where you are in the state, it's probably felt particularly tough over these last few years. And just because we've got a wet year, now we're thinking about flood issues. I mean, there's always complexities we see, but there's too much bad news out there to justify being complacent. So we want to encourage people to act, but there's also a lot of good stuff. I think you're going to hear about that from some of our partners on this call today, to justify to have despair. Like, we can't depress people into action is another quote I've often heard. And we absolutely need you there, pulling along with us, coming to the table, challenging us all to be better, to think differently, or be creative about solutions that are ultimately going to uplift the state and all of it, really embrace our best water future. So I don't know if there's questions for me, or we're going to take those at the end, Caitlin, but I'm happy to pass it on to our next presenter.
Yeah, I think we'll probably take them at the end unless anyone has a pressing question that you want to jump in with. But if not, let's hold questions. You can type them into the chat. We'll answer everything at the end. And of course, thank you, Russ. So with this, maybe slightly improved understanding of what the water plan is, we're going to shift our focus to look at some on-the-ground examples from across the state and hear about projects that exemplify some of these different action areas in the plan and probably fit in with different grant categories. And we'll kind of hopefully get us thinking about what we can do and how we can help and what is actually being done to implement the plan. But before we turn to our panelists, I wanted to call out one other resource from Water Education Colorado. If you're into these like project examples and looking around the state, last summer as part of the Water 22-year-long celebration of water, and as we were kind of all amping up and getting ready for the release of the water plan update, we co-hosted, or kind of we worked together with 8 of the state's 9 basin roundtables to host 8 mini tours around the state. During those tours, we explored some of the priorities in different basins and heard about projects on the ground and saw them in real life. And we're not doing those tours again this summer, but we recorded those and we've been cutting them down so they're easy to watch. And the initial idea for this webinar was to kind of show some of those videos, but we decided to just hear from folks and focus on what they have to say and answer your questions. But throughout the summer, we'll be releasing videos of all 8 of those tours. For now, we have just a handful. So I'm going to paste the completed mini tour videos into the chat today. And then we'll follow up by email later when all the videos are complete and you can check them out if you're interested. Great. So to our panel, we're going to hear about 4 different projects from different parts of the state that tie into water plan goals. And first we'll hear from Daniel Boyce. He's the program manager with the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project. And we'll hear more from Daniel, but I think that their work is kind of tying into the thriving watersheds and robust agriculture categories. We can see what you have to say, Daniel. Daniel, did you want to run your presentation or am I opening that up for you?
Yeah, I'll give it a try. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Let's see. Okay, I think it's working.
It is working. We can see the slides on the side if you want to go into presentation mode. Perfect. Perfect.
Great. Hi, everyone. So as Caitlin said, Daniel Boyce with the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project. And I'm going to be talking today about a project that we recently finished up just this last spring. It's a multi-benefit irrigation infrastructure and river restoration project that we're calling the Conejos River Partnership Project Phase 1. So just for a little background on the project, it really was born directly out of a stream management plan. So the restoration project facilitated the Swatch Creek, Rio Grande, and Conejos River stream management plans, and we wrapped them up in 2020. And a really big part of the stream management plans was a really robust river health assessment. And the map on the right here shows the results of that assessment for the Conejos River, which is located in the southern San Luis Valley in the Rio Grande Basin. And one of the things that we looked at was diversion infrastructure. And kind of how that relates to river health variables. So some of the key issues that were identified from the Conejos River Stream Management Plan were aging irrigation infrastructure and the need for frequent maintenance of that infrastructure with heavy equipment in the river channel just to maintain diversion structures and head gates. Also water administration challenges, which really were related to the inefficient diversion infrastructure. Also barriers to fish passage, which in most cases were related to diversion infrastructure, and then also degraded aquatic habitat. And so when we wrapped up the stream management plan, we got together with our kind of key stakeholders and partners who were involved in the stream management plan. So that included the Conejos Water Conservancy District, agricultural water users and private landowners, Colorado Division of Water Resources, CPW, Trout Unlimited, and Bureau of Land Management. So we really talked with that core group and looked at all the identified projects and priority action items, and the Conejos River Partnership Project Phase 1 really rose to the top of the list. So this map kind of shows the scope of the project. So it includes 4 project sites and 5 ditches. So starting on the downstream and on the right here, the Eliges Ditch, the Fuertecitos Ditch, Sabine School section, and then the Northeastern Ditch and New J.B. Romero Ditch, which are like right next to each other. And the objectives of the project were to replace the diversion structures and head gates associated with all of these ditches. And in doing so, rectify 3 fish barriers. So create fish passage where there wasn't before. Automate 3 head gates for increased efficiency. Consolidate 2 of the diversions into 1 diversion structure, and that's the Northeastern Ditch and J.B. Romero. And then additionally, enhance sediment transport at these site locations and reduce infrastructure maintenance needs for water users. Restore aquatic habitat and improve water rights administration. So there isn't time today to look at photos of all of these sites, but I wanted to just show one example. So this is the Fuertecitos Ditch diversion structure before the project was completed. It's made up of like sheet metal and then concrete rubble. And there's a number of issues with that. One is that you can see that it's a barrier to fish passage, especially for small-bodied native fish that are on this reach of the river. But it also backs up a lot of sediment, which degrades aquatic habitat. And it also is really problematic for the water users who are having trouble diverting water at low flows. And so this is the design for the project. The design is for a grouted boulder diversion structure that includes a low flow channel and fish passage. And this is that diversion structure under construction. This is when Robbins Construction was using heating pads to help the grout between the boulders cure. And then this is the finished product. So you can see on the left side here, the fish passage, which is a portion of the diversion that doesn't have grout coming up to the top of the boulders. And it's the lowest point on the diversion. So when flows get really low, there's always water in that fish passage. And then in the middle is the low flow channel, which helps water users divert their water rights at a range of different flows. And then on the far right is a sluice gate, which was installed to help sluice sediment past the head gate and the diversion. Additionally, at this site, head gate automation was added. And so this photo shows all of the electronics, and there's this stainless steel box where there's a motor that actually drives the head gate up and down. And so it communicates with the measurement in the ditch and makes sure that there's a consistent amount of water being diverted, and the head gate adjusts automatically to keep that amount consistent. And this was a really important part of the project to really support increased efficiency on the ditch, which really helps Division of Water Resources, Conejos Water Conservancy District, and other water managers more efficiently administer water rights throughout the system. So the project, I think, really supports and hits on a lot of the action areas from the updated Colorado Water Plan, but also the Basin Implementation Plan. So this illustration is from the Rio Grande Basin Implementation Plan. And there's a lot going on here, but in summary, this is just kind of trying to show all the different uses of water in the basin. And pointing out that that water has multiple benefits for multiple different water users and uses. And this project, by improving irrigation infrastructure, just as an example, is helping to support over 1,000 acres of flood irrigated wet meadows, which support migratory waterfowl, such as the sandhill crane, which most people probably have seen in the San Luis Valley. And so the project really helps to support wildlife, but also the recreational tourism industry and the communities as a whole. And then the increased efficiency that resulted from this project really supports Division of Water Resources and water managers to more efficiently administer the Rio Grande Compact. And then this just is a summary of all the different project funders. So just to show that it took a lot of different funding programs to make this project happen. So I think that's all I've got, but happy to answer questions later on.
Awesome, thank you. So yeah, we'll hold questions. You can type them into the chat if something comes up, but otherwise we'll address everything later on, and you can turn your microphones and cameras on and ask them yourselves and discuss if you want to. So next up, we're gonna move over to the Yampa River Basin and hear from Julie Baxter. She's the Water Resources Manager with the City of Steamboat Springs. And she's going to talk about their watershed wildfire protection plan. And again, Julie will tell us more about kind of how this fits in with the water plan, but seems to me like it might fit into the resilient planning and thriving watershed action items of the plan. So Julie, let me share my screen. Is that looking right to you?
Yep, looks good. Thanks. Yes, so I work for the City of Steamboat Springs, and Steamboat has used the priorities established and the funding made available through the water plan to pursue several projects of significant local importance. And one of those was planning to protect the Fish Creek watershed and our water supply system from the impacts of wildfire. And we received a Colorado Water Plan grant from the CWCB during the 2017 cycle for this planning project, and I believe it was under the environmental and recreation bucket at the time. And this project, and you can go ahead and move to the next slide, Caitlin. The city pursued it in partnership with the Mount Warner Water District. We're the two water providers. Oh, sorry, you need to go up one. There we go. We're the two water providers for the community, and we share the same water supply sources and the Fish Creek water treatment plant. And over 90% of the water that supplies the community comes from the Fish Creek Basin. And we have two reservoirs near the top of the watershed, direct diversion at Fish Creek to the water treatment plant. And it's most of the basin is located in Routt National Forest. It's designated roadless area. So it's very steep, rugged terrain, heavily forested with a mixed conifer forest. And so in the pictures here, if you've been to Steamboat, you may have been to Fish Creek Falls. And there's a picture of Fish Creek and then our water treatment plants. And then this in the bottom these are the fires in 2018 that this photo was used a lot when we were preparing the plan, because you can see the Fish Creek Basin and then on either side of it, smoke from different wildfires. So you can see we obviously, have a big risk that we're worried about here. Runoff on burn scars causes erosion and flooding that carries debris and contaminants into water sources, and sediment can fill reservoirs, decreasing storage capacity. It affects the water quality and our ability to treat the water. It's more difficult and expensive to make it safe for drinking. So wildfire in the watershed is one of our greatest risks for our drinking water supply. And so the project here was to develop a collaborative plan with our state and federal and local partners to assess our risks and vulnerabilities from wildfire to our drinking water system and our infrastructure, and also to watershed health. And so one of the first steps in this was to develop a watershed risk assessment. So next slide, Caitlin. There was a lot of analysis and modeling that went into this, but what made it kind of different from the type of risk assessment that you might find in a community wildfire protection plan was it was looking at the post-fire hydrologic hazard analysis. So understanding within the Fish Creek basement, these different catchment areas, which ones were most likely to contribute large sediment loads to critical infrastructure if there was to be a severe wildfire. And we learned some interesting things that really helped focus our activities and priorities in this hazard assessment. So in the headwaters above the reservoirs, were very healthy montane meadows and wetlands and riparian corridors. And these areas are all really important to reduce the potential for erosion. And they act as buffers then to wildfires and absorb sediment. And so it's very important to protect these healthy ecosystems in the top of the watershed. Many of the areas that have the highest potential for high intensity wildfire and post-fire erosion are the most difficult to treat. They're very inaccessible. So trying to treat those, to do fuel treatment projects would be extremely difficult and expensive and unlikely to actually have a lot of impact in the types of wildfires we can expect in these types of forests, which don't happen that often, but when they do, they're extremely hot and everything kind of goes up at once. So the assessment led us to believe that it was worth our time to emphasize fuel treatment projects in the community to prevent fire from spreading into the canyon from town was actually the more likely scenario. And that's something that we had more control over. So let me see, I think we can go ahead. And I guess one other interesting part of this project is that it included a very in-depth analysis of the water supply, treatment, infrastructure, and operations, and made recommendations for how we can improve the capacity of our system to handle post-fire water quality and sediment load. So it was a very multidisciplinary plan. You have to have really the right consultant teams to get these done. And the plan, go ahead and move to the next slide. It was adopted by City Council and the Mount Warner Water District Board in 2019. The implementation strategy includes these kind of big 4 buckets listed here, and I gave you a couple examples of the type of projects underneath those. But the overall the strategy is about a wildfire resistant landscape. It's also about those post-fire hydrological controls that we can do in the watershed, making our water supply system and operations more resilient, as well as stakeholder collaboration and coordination. And some of the big outcomes that we've seen so far is that we have completed a project at the Fish Creek water treatment plant for fuels reduction and treatment around the plant to protect that facility and infrastructure. And that was from a grant from the Colorado State Forest Service. The city and Mount Warner have also been big supporters in forming the Routt County Wildfire Mitigation Council, who's now leading community education and awareness around wildfire and working with neighborhoods in the wildland urban interface areas on mitigation projects. And then we've also have completed an assessment of the funding opportunities in the Federal Infrastructure Act to make those modifications to the water supply system infrastructure and operations that help us to improve our ability to manage post-fire impacts. But, even bigger, I think that this plan and this project really helped kind of change the community and certainly the local government's attitude about wildfires and build a lot of momentum. And two of the even bigger picture outcomes have been that city and county staff are in the process right now of proposing strengthening standards for wildfire mitigation in our building and our development codes. And we've also made big strides towards redundancy in our water system. So Mount Warner and the city have been expanding our capacity to supply and treat water from the Yampa River. And the city has also been working to firm up supply and storage and then work towards an additional water treatment plant on the Elk River so that we have these different redundant systems if we are to have a wildfire in one. So I really want to emphasize like the value that I find as a water manager in this plan and determining priorities, guiding work plans, communicating with elected officials. And so I think, the state made a pretty small investment. I think we get the grant was for 50,000. But a strategic one where they have really helped the community to plan for and reduce potentially, devastating losses in the future. That's it.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah.
Please stop sharing the screen. Okay, awesome. So now, again, if you have questions for Julie, type them into the chat or write them down. And we're going to shift our focus down to the Arkansas River Basin and hear from Scott Lorenz. And Scott is a senior project manager with Colorado Springs Utilities. He's going to talk about an exciting collaborative water sharing agreement, which I think is tying to the robust agriculture and vibrant communities action items. And Scott, let me get your presentation up and going.
Thank you. And I will give a shameless plug while you're doing that for Water Education Colorado. I've participated in the Water Leaders program, obviously read all the Headwaters citizens guides, and just I can't thank you enough for what you guys do for this state. I think education is the start of the discussions that we have and need to have. And for us and what CWCB did with the first water plan, I know that's the topic of the magazine, and I was very complimentary of the water plans, and I was trying to look at them from big picture. So I've been in the water business long enough to have gone through the process of the first water plan, and that was Herculean, and it was different than anything that had been done in the state before. And some of the questions at the time were, how in the world can you take comments from all these different points of view and fit them into one report that really captures that? And I think the first thing you do is accept that not everybody is going to completely agree with it, but we are all going to learn from it. And it's going to be an education process to understand different perspectives. And so that first water plan really led Colorado Springs, I would say, to put more focus into how it was developing its future water supply. So if you don't know, most of Colorado Springs water comes from the Colorado River Basin. Obviously, if you've watched the news at all, you know the challenges there. But we are located in the Arkansas Basin. We do have some supplies that come out of the Arkansas Basin, but those were largely, they were a product of their own times. It was the 1980s, but it's something we look back on today and certainly are not happy with, and it doesn't meet today's standards. And that's the stuff we were involved with in Crowley County and the Colorado Canal there. And it's something we still work on today. We still partner with farmers under the Colorado Canal to fix things and to make things work as much as possible. But so the first water plan comes out, and there's this focus on ATMs. And ATMs may have been the worst acronym ever because everybody thinks of money when you talk about it. I'm so pleased we now call them collaborative water sharing programs or projects. And that's what brought me to Colorado Springs Utilities. So I have no background in municipal supply. I am completely lost when we start talking about MGD, any of those type of things. I was always in the agricultural community. And I think that was some of what started in Colorado Springs, was this effort to understand the ag community and understand the lower Arkansas Valley. The buzzword you often hear is community, and who's your community? And we think about that a lot, just as we're on this webinar, all of us together today. I mean, what Daniel was talking about, the Conejos River, is what I spent 2 weeks camping there every year of my youth growing up in the San Luis Valley. And so I know all the places he's talking about. I think he did an awesome job pronouncing some of the names because they're easy to butcher. Lobatos Bridge, that was on the map there. I threw rocks off of that from when I was just a little tiny guy. And then Julie comes on and talks about forest health. And obviously wildfires are something that have affected all of us. It's affected Colorado Springs very closely with Waldo Canyon fire, but the Arkansas Basin as a whole has had fires, and we deal with that, and it impacts water quality, it impacts water supply. So I really want, as we have these discussions, to think of community in a little broader perspective. Caitlin, next slide, please. Yeah, I should warn you guys. When Caitlin told me I had 5 minutes, that's just a warm up, and I'm gonna really try to be fast as I go through this. So, first thing I'm going to talk about with you, something our organization is very proud of, and it's, you know, we hear of unintended consequences. This is one of the unintended benefits of a project that we did in 2016, following. Talk about the water plan, focus on ATMs, talk about the basin implementation plan, which focused on 2 key areas of water supply need. There was water supply need for augmentation groups. So that's for agricultural wells in the lower Arkansas Valley. And then obviously a large municipal supply gap. And so our first ATM/water sharing project out of the box was called the LAMA project, not Llama the animal, but Lower Arkansas Water Management Association. Anybody that doesn't know about them, they are just a gem of an organization. They're really the last guarantor of meeting our compact obligations on the Arkansas River. They augment a lot of wells in Prowers County, some in Bank County, but really in that far eastern side of the state where agriculture is absolutely king and is key to the economy. We did a project with them in 2017, something we're still very proud of. It involved water being purchased by Colorado Springs Utilities, but 50% of the water was given for the benefit of LAMA's members. They also built water storage, or we helped them build water storage, and they access CWCB funds to acquire additional water storage to be able to stabilize their members' pumping needs. But the water supply that we purchased that we share with LAMA comes out of Bank County, and this is where we get to the unintended benefits, because I mean, you got to know, we were proud as could be of the project and thought we had done amazing stuff. We were implementing the water plan, and we really hadn't taken the perspective of Bank County and the commissioners, you know, the representatives of that county talked with us, and we started what was a really difficult, but for us, and I think you would hear from them, a very important discussion to understand, as Colorado Springs is doing projects, even something that, you know, is promoted like an ATM or water sharing agreement, there are still going to be impacts. And I think we all had to admit that we didn't fully understand what those impacts were at a county level. So we did joint economics studies. We looked at revegetation and dry up of parcels and what impact that had on the county. And more than anything, I think we just began to understand and appreciate each other and the different perspectives we were bringing and the different needs that we had. So what this led into, it really ended up was a 2 to 3 year negotiation process. And we were able to come to an agreement with Bank County that that specified if we were going to do water supply projects within their county, what those would look like. It said sideboards on it. It was sideboards ultimately we could live with and Benton County could live with. But the intent was always to be more than that. It was intended to take the relationship that was forming and make sure that was included and that was preserved. And it meant Colorado Springs saying, okay, Benton County is providing not just water to us, but the food that's going to Whole Foods and to King Soopers and to Walmart Market. That's all coming from farmers in the lower Arkansas Valley. And we need to appreciate that. And we want to sustain that just as much as anything else. And so you see the goals that we had for the Benton County IGA. 1041 permit is how a county typically would regulate a water supply project. We provide mitigation for Benton County. They have economic impacts. They have just fundamental real costs of having to go out and monitor what's going on in their county. And that takes time, that takes resources in a county that's fairly strapped for resources. And then the bottom one, this is one, and I think CWCB does a good job of listening to this and understanding it, but it tells you the complexity of a community, because Benton County, obviously there is impacts to the county, but if you talk to farmers, not all farmers, but a large majority will say, you have to respect our private property rights. And what they're meaning when they say that is they want to hold on to the right to buy and sell that water right. That sometimes is their whole retirement, is the ability to sell that at some point in time. And so both sides, Benton County and Colorado Springs, I think came in with the idea that we were going to respect that. And so what you see is limitations placed on Colorado Springs, not limitations placed on the farmers themselves. And that became an important part of it. Next slide, please. Okay, so what this applies to, we could develop up to 15,000 acre feet of new supply. To give you a sense, that would be about 10% of the total supply, water supply in the county, and that's almost exclusively used for agriculture. Limited amount of acreage to be removed, and you're going to hear when we talk about that next project we did, why that amount is included. But what we basically heard from farmers is, and the county did not disagree, that there are some acres of land that probably never should be put into farming. And so if you could identify a water quality benefit, an operational benefit for a ditch company, just poor soil quality, something like that, and Benton County and Colorado Springs could agree that there was that secondary benefit, then there could be a small amount. It ends up being just a little over 3,000 acres that could be dried up in the county. Benton County also wants the ability to participate, wanted the ability to participate in water storage and water supply projects. They're part of the Ark Valley Conduit, the communities within Benton County. That's an important thing. We've supported the conduit throughout its development and really look forward to seeing its completion. And it's something that this was an easy one. We are absolutely pleased always to work with any of our partners on collaborative storage or supply projects. And then the last one, Arkansas Preservation Principles, that just simply says that all the signatories, and it's the big municipalities and the conservancy districts in the Arkansas Basin, saying they'll work together really to raise all ships together to make sure that the Arkansas Basin as a whole is successful, whether it be economic, water supply, all those different areas. Next slide, please. Okay, so we get the IGA put in place with Benton County. We made mitigation payments. The last thing I'll say with the IGA and what was probably a game changer from our perspective, we not only made an upfront payment, which I think is more typical with these, but every acre foot of water we take out of Bank County in perpetuity, we will make a payment back to Bank County to make sure any impacts that happen 30 or 40 or 50 years down the road continue to be mitigated. And when we say mitigated, we want there to be a benefit for Bank County ultimately. Yes. So we worked through that process that really was all encompassing, but it is one of the things I'm most proud of in my career, is just how we went from that tough situation to actually finding common ground. And that led, just as that was finishing up, to our next water sharing project. And this is definitely a case, you'll hear me say it a lot, of learn by doing. And I think it's what CWCB champions. This is what we champion. The best idea is one that hasn't been had yet. And so we do something, we see what works, we see more importantly what doesn't work, and then we adapt, and the next project should be better. And my hope is somebody watching this webinar is going to see what we did and say, oh, you know what, that's a good idea, but I think I can do it better. There would be nothing more pleasing to me than somebody doing it better. And that's what we should always be trying to do. This is a photo of one tower of a center pivot. Center pivots, for those of you in some of the other basins, particularly South Platte and Rio Grande, they are very common form of irrigation. But the Arkansas Basin, for some unknown reason, was really late to the game adopting center pivot installation. And they can be up to 40% more efficient in irrigation method than traditional flood irrigation. And so, next slide, please. All right, so this is just a general location, Caitlin, and we'll hop off of this one pretty quick, but you see that Fort Lyon water sharing star. That's 110 miles from, back one, please. There you go. That's 110 miles from Colorado Springs, a long distance driving, a long distance flying, but not so different in the issues that we're ultimately dealing with. Colorado Springs has got to a point that we haven't maxed out our conservation in city, but we've gotten, and we've pushed a lot, and our conservation team probably don't get the credit that they deserve for cutting the usage by household and by person down so much. I think the last I saw was 80 gallons per day. And so put a lot of money into that, really got the low-hanging fruit. Now we're getting the high-hanging fruit there, but there's diminishing returns for every dollar spent. And so what we decided we were going to focus on was helping farmers become more efficient. And so we had this beautiful opportunity and chance meeting with a couple of young guys, Future Farmers of America. One of them, I think, was the state leader. Both of them were the local leaders in FFA. One just out of college, one just out of high school, named Mark and Caleb Wirtz. On the right there, that's not a malfunctioning Pac-Man game. That farm was being sold by a retiring farmer, and it was all flood irrigated. The Wirtz had been leasing it and farming it through flood irrigation, but they wanted to buy it and they wanted to install center pivots. And so we went in with what's now called our center pivot program, where we will help the farmer buy the farm, we'll help them buy the center pivot. They put the center pivot onto previously flood irrigated ground. So the center pivot covers everything in blue on here. Everything in yellow is what previously was flood irrigated, but now is no longer irrigated. And we take the shares off of the yellow and we leave the shares on the blue part of the farm. It works good for Bank County because they do not have dried up parcels. In fact, one of the things they identified in their 1041 regulations was corners on these fields were not going to be treated as dry up of an entire parcel, because you're really keeping the economic activity going here, and it's much easier to protect and maintain corners being dried up on an otherwise productive farm. And you see a lot of hay barns being built. You see equipment sheds, houses, all those type of things. So the stats there are on the left. I won't bore you with those. Next slide, please. These are our boys. I will put that link to a YouTube video. If you do nothing else, Love Hay Company, and you can find them on Facebook. I think you can find them on Twitter. I don't know, the Go Pig or Go Home. That's FFA, but I'll put some links in that you guys can go and look at that video. These guys just give me so much hope for the next generation. And they're really what led to our current water sharing programs. And we like this, Bent County likes this. We're implementing more of these. And I think, Caitlin, I have gone way over, but not as far over as I was afraid would go.
Thanks, Scott. And that's okay, we still have time. So we're gonna now turn to Lisa Darling. She is the Executive Director of the South Metro Water Supply Authority, and she's also President of the Water Education Colorado Board, and she's here to talk with us about ASR work that ties to the Vibrant Communities and Resilient Planning action areas. Let me get your presentation going, Lisa.
Thanks, Caitlin. And Scott, thank you for all of your service to Water Education Colorado. Scott was on our board for a number of years, and we miss having you around, but I'll start while Caitlin's loading that up. I'll start really quickly and talk a little bit about South Metro, because I think sometimes when people think of the South Metro area, you know, they don't think of the authority necessarily. They think of a number of the water providers that are in the area. So we are 14 water providers in Douglas and Arapahoe County, about 85% of Douglas, a little over 10%, 15% of Arapahoe. We're about the size and population, we're updating these numbers, but we're about the size of the city of Aurora if you put us all together. And we really were formed with a very specific purpose, which was to move away from non-renewable water resources. And some of you may recall the story of Two Forks, which was a reservoir project that had participation from a number of providers in the Front Range. And that project was actually vetoed by EPA headquarters in the late 80s, early 90s. And many of the water providers in the area had other plans, had other water resource development plans, but many of the communities in South Metro did not. And so they continued to grow at these extraordinary paces and rates, but only on the non-tributary groundwater wells that had been dug. And so what we were finding was a decline in the aquifers and a growing population and a growing concern along the whole Front Range, the state, many of the larger water providers, about the situation that was brewing, the challenge that we needed to meet. So South Metro was actually formed in 2004, so not quite 20 years ago, but it was specifically to shift away from those non-renewable resources. And we figured that we could use three things. Partnership. It was really one of the first discussions of collaboration, amongst water providers. We could use those partnerships to have more efficient investments. And then we decided that we wanted to be leaders in efficiency and conservation and in reuse. So we joined together for that specific purpose. And then a subset of the Water Supply Authority became the WISE Authority. It's 10 of the 14 members that are in a partnership for renewable water resources with Denver Water and Aurora Water. It's a perpetual agreement. It's 100,000 acre feet over a 10-year block. We're very excited, still under development. It is operational, but it's still under full development as a couple of years away. But I wanted to talk really briefly about the tools in the toolbox. And Russ mentioned, and he's quite right, storage is so important. And the WISE agreement, for example, will use that. You'll see the aquifer storage and recovery. It's a type of storage, right? But if you have renewable water resources that you can inject at times of plenty, in dry years, of course, you can you can draw when demand exceeds supplies, the surface supplies. So next slide, please. So what we have is a connected system. See if we can catch up, Caitlin. There we go. What we have is this connected system. So all of the members are now connected through a $120 million investment to connect these systems. And we started looking at these regional areas to the north, to the south, to the west, that possibly had the ability to operate both individually and as a regional hub. Now, many of our members have very robust ASR programs. Julie Tonetti's on for Centennial. Centennial has had a program in place since 1994. I think Heather Justice is on. Heather Justice used to be with the town of Castle Rock. She is now with Parker Water, but many of the members have individual ASR permits. So we're starting to look at whether or not there was the ability to combine these programs. Next slide, please. So this is what it would kind of look like. What we would do, and you can just kind of go through this one. There we go. So there are the hubs. And then you can see once we develop these regional areas of draw, then I can just kind of walk through these. Caitlin, you can go ahead and hit those. The hub characteristics. So you use these basically as regional storage facilities, and you can meet the supply and demand challenges. There we go. Site-specific hydrogeologic properties. These are 3 ideal locations in the aquifer. You can look at injection and extraction rates that they have already modeled and performed at, and start looking at the number of wells. So go ahead, another slide, please. So of course, there's a number of wells. As I mentioned, our communities still have a number of non-tributary wells. So we would look at those potential interactions with those nearby wells. Next slide. But here's what we're really looking at. This is an optimization model. So if you could integrate those operations, you could increase the number of wells, and you could create a wheeling of water. So the WISE agreement, for example, for those 10 members that I was telling you about, that can go from anywhere from 0 acre-feet delivery for up to 24 months to up to 26,000 acre-feet delivery, as long as you're meeting that 100,000 acre-foot yield in a 10-year block. So you can understand when they're on the greater side of the deliveries, having the ability to store that water would be ideal. And it is treated water. So that seemed as if an ideal situation for ASR. Next slide, please. So here's what we have. A number of us have numerical models of the groundwater, the aquifers. What we're looking at developing is more of a conceptual model. So basically taking it from a 2D to a 3D, a much more robust model. Next slide, please. So our phase 1 of this project is creating this conceptual model, and it's looking at this technical platform. And you can see the list of the characteristics that the model will look at. So we'll have cross sections of the aquifer, we'll have mapping of the geologic and hydrogeologic areas, the key features, contour maps, flow depictions, the aquifer properties, particularly transmissivity, hydraulic conductivity, hydrographs, the well location, again, looking for interference, extraction rates, and any water quality concerns. So a number of these our members have successful ASR programs, but it's based on their source water. So having this WISE introduction and then having these cross connections between people's source waters is one of the critical things that we have to look at in this hub concept. So one more slide, please. If we're successful with our phase 1 modeling, what we'd like to do is take that conceptual model and develop the local hub inset. So what basically be looking at is whether or not there's value in creating these well fields for ASR purposes, where a number of members can store and extract their water when their individual demands allow for it. And so what this would be the second phase of the efforts that we're just starting. So another slide, please. So we were successful. We got a Colorado Water Plan grant. Thank you, state, to do this work. These are the tasks that we'll be doing. It's about $185,000. So no small task. And as I mentioned, we're hopeful that phase 2, we can continue the work. And I think the next slide is simply the schedule. So you can see that the goal is to have it completed, the conceptual model completed by the end of this year, which is pretty aggressive. But we're hopeful that we'll be able to create this, collate all of the data that's available, and move forward with this concept. Because if you look at the water plan uses multi-user collaboration, the efficiency of developing infrastructure together. And if you've been following at all, the non-tributary groundwater rulemaking that's been happening over the last couple of years, there's a real focus on what's called TAW, or total allowable withdrawals, whether or not that was the intent of the rules and the permit issue. When you look at non-tributary groundwater, that is still at issue in the courts, exactly what TAW was intended to be and how it's applied. But you can understand how ASR is going to be a critical tool in the toolbox to manage our water supply. So this is really all about aquifer management. None of our members will ever, a few have completely gone to renewable, but a number of them will always have a small percentage of those non-tributary wells. It's clean water, it's inexpensive water, it's a great drought supply. And so conjunctively, those wells will continue to be used to a certain percentage, but being able to manage the aquifer, I think, is critical for the vibrant communities that we hope to sustain into the future. So that's all I have, and I will stop there.
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks to all of our panelists so far. We're running a little bit late. I had planned to ask everyone a few questions, but I think I will ask you one question and then encourage anyone on the line to start thinking about questions and typing them into the chat, and we can start reading them out loud and getting them answered, or you can raise your hand in the Zoom function. So as you think about your questions, I am wondering if any of our panelists would be willing to talk about either how their project or entity ties in with their basin's priorities, or if you're involved with your basin implementation plan or the water plan, you can speak to other basin-wide priorities or exciting next steps or projects underway that you haven't told us about but want to.
I'll get started just real quick, Caitlin. I just wanted to say for the Metro Roundtable, so our project, of course, was brought forward from the South Metro communities, which was awesome. And certainly that's many of the projects that are anticipated in the water plan, I think were intended to be that way. You know, communities resolving challenges that they're facing for different water supplies and demands. But the Metro Roundtable and the South Platte Roundtable took a little bit of a turn when the new water plan came out, and we were so excited and are so excited about the dialogue that we have with our state team. We thought, well, what if the roundtable themselves started looking at what if we looked at the water plan? What if we looked at the water plan with our dialogue and discussions, and we actually had committees that scoped projects, and instead of having projects come from outside in for approval, we would almost have like, we see these actions that the water plan is pointing to, and how exciting is this? So, hey, everyone, we'd like to see these projects get explored. And so we developed this committee-based, roundtable-based process where we identified a few basin priorities. They weren't meant to be huge efforts, 1 or 2 years, pretty simple, pretty small, but ones that we felt were really critical. So now we have a flow of projects coming in for approval, coming in from others, and then coming out from the roundtable. So we're really excited to see where that goes.
Lisa, I think that's well said. That's kind of the exciting part about this, is the back and forth between the Basin Roundtables and CWCB. I've participated in the ARC Basin Roundtable. I know we have folks also participate in Metro, South Platte Roundtable, and then folks that sit in on the Colorado Basin Roundtable. But what Lisa said is absolutely right. The first water plan comes, the first basin implementation plans come, and then it starts becoming a little bit of a bounce back and forth, where the state now updates the water plan, and it really, I think, rejuvenated. Maybe it was rejuvenated is too strong. It just was an excitement, I think, from the roundtable to say, hey, just what Lisa talked about was what the roundtable talked about. Which of the projects that we've identified can we really see referenced in the water plan here, and what can we do to really support those and get those things moving? So that's the part of, I think, the discussion, is that back and forth discussion has been invaluable for us, and I think for the Arc Basin as a whole.
I can jump in, Caitlin, and just add, well, excellent example. What Lisa was thinking was top of my mind too, and appreciate the other comments as well. I'll put a link in the chat, but one thing we did just to try to make it even more accessible is, and this is on our CWCB main page under the water plan, but we actually broke out just if you just want to see all the partner actions together, you can. But one of the clear through lines that we learned is that the water plan absolutely, well, 2015, we didn't have any water plan grant program, right? The water plan inspired the legislature to create water plan grants. And so since then, and knowing that that grant process really asked to cite, how is this referencing basin implementation plans, or how is this supported by the water plan? You know, we really tried to make this a bit of a through line to know if you're writing something, to really be able to see yourself in the plan and know what to, you know, a grant might be supported. So that partner action document hopefully helps with that. And it absolutely is critical, this roundtable feedback loop. And I don't want to take away anything from that, but I do feel a little bit remiss because we get that feedback of, well, you know, I'm not a roundtable member, or I can't be a roundtable member. There's not an open seat. I mean, two things. One, either way, I think there's immense value in just working with your local roundtable, because you have just such a wealth of knowledge. And there are plenty of people that go to roundtable meetings that are heard and do get to voice a concern or raise an opinion. Doesn't necessarily mean they have to be on the roundtable proper. But the roundtable, or the water plan, is really speaking to everybody, whether you're part of the roundtable or not. And I would really hope that a lot of these through lines are equally things that anybody feels like they could pick up, see themselves in, and run with, to support something that they're taking to city council to say, this is important. You know, if you feel like your community needs to be tougher on turf, or if you feel like your community needs to think about how to be more inclusive in public dialogue, like all these things are rooted in the water plan. And I think lend support. If your community is struggling with, you know, we're losing a lot of ag, like these things are all there. And I'm really trying to think about holistically of how we support all areas. So please, you know, if you have an opportunity, work with your local roundtable. But if the first and easiest source of access just to get involved is, you know, your neighborhood group, that's great too. And I think the water plan is equally speaking to you.
I'll jump in and just mention something from the Rio Grande Basin. There's certainly a focus in the Rio Grande on kind of multi-benefit projects, I would say, and I think I kind of spoke to that with our Cañas River Partnership Project. But another key challenge in the Rio Grande is really reaching and then maintaining aquifer sustainability. Not in every part of the basin, but particularly in this area called Subdistrict 1, where we've really seen a precipitously declining aquifer. And Colorado Open Lands got a Colorado Water Plan grant. I think it's been maybe a year and a half now since they got that, but it was to develop this concept of a groundwater conservation easement. And it's a pretty interesting concept that's kind of innovative and new. And the idea is to, you know, support agricultural producers while also reaching aquifer sustainability. And the way it works is it's sort of applying a traditional conservation easement, where normally like the conservation value would be on, you know, the development rights for a private property. But in this case, it's the conservation value is really the value of that water that's being pumped. And so it's voluntary and flexible, but allows producers to pump less water, but be compensated for it through a conservation easement, both in terms of the timing of when that water is pumped. You can pump in more in some years, less in other years, and, you know, fallow some fields in some years and not in other years. And the first groundwater conservation easement closed, I think, about 6 months ago. So just kind of a neat innovative concept that actually came out of a water plan grant, and I think has a lot of potential. I'm definitely not an expert on it. Colorado Open Lands folks could answer more questions on that, but I think it could be applied in other areas as well. So just wanted to highlight that.
I'll also add, I think in the Yampa Green Basin and the roundtable, it's actually been the stream management plans that have really driven a lot of the projects and actions in the last few years. I think because they do involve a lot more partners than the basin implementation plan. Whether, that may not be by design, but that's just kind of how it's worked out. So, so the stream management plans, we've done one in Steamboat, but there's also a new one for the whole Yampa River Basin, and we're now working on one for the White. And then the roundtable has actually just formed a new committee that has a role of getting projects off the ground from the BIP and from the new IWMP, the Integrated Water Management Plan for the Yampa Basin. So just to focus on keeping things moving forward and projects happening.
Thanks, everyone. And I think our panelists have seen this, but we had a question come in about the use of aquavoltaic panels. Did you see Russ's answer in the chat? Any other questions or follow-up conversation on that? No. Okay. Does anyone else have questions? You can jump in, raise your hand, type it into the chat. Oh, Jeanette, go ahead.
I do have another question. I'm on the South Platte. I'm in a League of Women Voters, but I'm also the president of a ditch company on the south side of Boulder, the senior ditch right off South Boulder Creek. And there's a project to try to do better fish ladders and whatever. And Daniel was talking about all of I was wondering how willing all of your ditch companies came forward to jump in and address their either remodeling of their head gates and their collaboration on how much money they were willing to put in, because I'm a little ditch company. I don't have a big budget. And we're asked, now this collaborative thing with trout and the wildlife and the Boulder County stuff, they want us to really put in some major renovation stuff, which will cost us a lot of money. Anyway, also some of the automated head gates, which in concept I like. I did not get a resounding yes from the participants in my board or our ditch rider. So any comments that would help, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and I would say it's taken years to get to the point where we're at, of getting kind of the ag community and ditch companies like on board with and willing to work with us. And I think that started years back before I started with the organization, with folks just kind of word of mouth and talking with ag producers about maybe different ways of designing diversion structures, emerging technologies like automated head gates. But, like for the Conejos River Partnership Project, we really gravitated toward the folks who, it was a combination of where the project need was, but also where the willing ditch companies were. And so all those folks were really excited to work with us. They understood that they, in most cases, like they weren't financially probably able to get this project, a comprehensive project, done without the help of some grant funding. And, we really understood the river health benefits of the projects that we were proposing. And so, we didn't really have any pushback there, but again, that's the result of years of work in those areas, and also kind of the local champions in Conejos County and on the Conejos River who kind of help advocate for our organization. So I think it just takes time, and also a lot of thought and consideration and listening to what their, the needs are on any given ditch company's, infrastructure and what they've seen over the past, 40, 50 years of operating that ditch, and really learning from that goes a long way. And then your question about, the ditch company's contribution financially, we feel like it's really important that, ditch companies and water users are contributing to a project, but again, it's a percentage of the total cost that they're able to afford. But yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks.
And we just had another question come into the chat. Cynthia asks, could you discuss the proposal by a private group to move San Luis Valley water to Douglas County? How does this fit in with the water plan? Does anyone want to comment?
I'll take a stab at it and appreciate the question. It's certainly an issue of interest, and as much as we try to keep water apolitical, I do believe this is a topic that we've even heard the governor kind of take a stance on. I think the issue of moving water from basin to basin or across the slopes is tricky, has always been tricky, and is always a delicate discussion. In the water plan, well, I should note, maybe just addressing a couple of things that Daniel noted, and maybe I was remiss, and Julie as well, that the spirit of trying to create projects that have multi-purpose, multi-benefit are embedded in the water plan and embedded in a water plan grant program. The process by which projects are developed, and when thinking about environmental projects like stream management plans or integrated water management plans, the process of bringing together the most diverse group of stakeholders are concepts that are embedded and supported in the water plan, and they're concepts that were brought forward from the 2015 plan. Among those is also the efforts that were kind of codified by the Interbasin Compact Committee, which Lisa Darling is actually a member of as well, but concepts that are included in was a standalone document, was put in the original water plan, carried forward in this water plan, called the conceptual framework. And it really sets forward some principles that need to be considered when we have projects that are moving like this. And if maybe the question isn't whether the project is supported by the water plan, but really is it in alignment with the spirit of the water plan and the spirit of the conceptual framework. And leave it to you to maybe dig into, but I do think that having thoughtful, honest debate that's based in reality of what water is there, and really working with local stakeholders in a way which they feel included, not railroaded, are certainly lessons that we've learned the hard way in the past and still debate over time. So there is necessities, like things like storage are always going to be tricky conversations, but we have to come up with ways that are doing this that don't completely disadvantage one community or rob them of their livelihood. When we think about the future and water being challenged, we think about agriculture in particular, we think about Daniels Basin in the Rio, we are already seeing that the future is challenged when it comes to just the water that's going to be there to meet compact issues. When we think about the Rio Grande or the Republican, there's issues of where we are just going to have less in the future, and the conversation probably needs to gravitate more to how do we do more with less, and not how do we take it from other people.
Thanks, Russ. So we are just about out of time. Does any of our panelists, do you have any final last parting thoughts or comments? Awesome. Well, oh, Lisa, were you gonna hop in?
I was just gonna say, if anyone has any additional questions, or if you just want to chat, I think that's why we're all in this community, and the community is so positive. So don't hesitate to reach out. Caitlin's got all of our contact information. So
yeah, happy to share. Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. Thanks to our panelists for sharing. And that's it. We have recorded the webinar, so unless there's some terrible technical issue, we will share the recording within the next week and follow up with you all by email. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.